The Magic of Reality, Richard Dawkins. The Magic of Reality, How we know what really is true. Chapter 4. What are things made of? What are things made of? In Victorian times, a favorite book for children was Edward Lear's Book of Nonsense, as well as the poem about the owl and the pussycat, which you may know because it's still famous, the Jumbly, and the fable Who Has No Toes. I love the recipes at the end of the book. The one for Cromwellius cutlet begins like this. Procure some strips of beef and having cut them into the smallest possible slices. Proceed to cut them still smaller, 8 or perhaps 9 times. What do you get if you keep on cutting stuff into smaller and smaller pieces? Suppose you take a piece of anything and cut it in half using the thinnest and sharpest razor blade you can find. Then you cut them in half, then cut, then half in half, and so on over and over again. Does the pieces eventually get so small that they can't get any smaller? How thin is the edge of the razor blade? How small is the sharp end of the needle? What are the smallest bits that things are made of? The ancient civilization of Greece, China, and India all seem to have arrived in the same idea that everything is made from four elements: air, water, fire, and earth. But on ancient Greek, Democritus came a bit closer to the truth. Democritus thought that if we cut anything up into sufficiently small pieces, you would eventually reach a piece of so small that it couldn't be cut any further. The Greek for cut is Thomas, and if you stick an A in front of a Greek word, it means not or you can't. So, atomic means something too small to be cut any smaller, and that's where our word atom comes from. An atom of gold is the smallest possible bit of gold. Even if it were possible to cut it any smaller, it would cease to be gold. An atom of iron is the smallest possible bit of iron, and so on. We now know that there are about 100 different kinds of atoms, of which only maybe 90 occurs in nature. There are few others have been concocted by scientists in the lab, but only in tiny quantities. Poor substances that consist of one kind of atom only are called elements. Same word was once used for earth, air, fire, and water, but with a very different meaning. Examples of elements are hydrogen, oxygen, iron, chloride, copper, sodium, gold, carbon, mercury, and nitrogen. Some elements such as molybdenum are rare on Earth, which is why you may not have heard of molybdenum, but commoner elsewhere in the universe. If you wonder how we know this, wait for Chapter 8. Metals such as iron, lead, copper, zinc, tin, and mercury are elements. So are gases such as oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and neon. But most of the substances that we see around us are not elements but compounds. A compound is one you get when two or more different atoms join together in a particular way. You have probably heard water referred to as H2O. That's a chemical formula, and being is a compound of one oxygen atom joined to hydrogen atom. A group of atoms join together to make a compound called a molecule. Some molecules are very simple. A molecule of water, for example, just has those 3 atoms. Other molecules, especially those in living bodies, have hundreds of atoms, all joined together in a very particular way. Indeed, it's the way they are joined together as well as the type and number of atoms, and makes any particular molecule one compound and not another. You can also use a word molecular to describe when you get two or more of the same kinds of atoms joined together. A molecule of oxygen, a gas, was needed in order to breathe, consists of two oxygen atoms joined together. Sometimes three oxygen atoms joined together to form a different kind of molecule called ozone. The number of atoms in a molecule really makes a difference, even if atoms are all the same. Ozone is harmful to breathe, but we benefit from a layer of it in the Earth's upper atmosphere, which protects us from the most damaging of the sun's rays. One of the reasons Australians have to be especially careful when sunbathing is that there is a hole in the ozone layer in the far south. Crystal, atoms on parade. A diamond crystal is a huge molecule of no fixed size, consists of millions of atoms of the element carbon stuck together. All line up in a very particular way. They are so regularly spaced inside the crystal, you could think of them as being like soldiers on parade, except that they are parading in three dimensions, like a soul of a fish. But the number of fish in the soul, the number of carbon atoms in even the smallest diamond crystal is gigantic, more than all the fish, plus all the people in the world, and stuck together. It's a misleading way to describe them if it makes you think of the atoms, solid lumps of carbon closely packed into no space in between. In fact, as we shall see, most solid matter consists of the empty space. That'll take some explaining. I'll come back to it. All crystals are built up in the same soldier on parade way. The atoms regularly spaced in a fixed pattern that gives the whole crystal its shape. Indeed, that's what we mean by a crystal. Some soldiers are capable of parading in more than one way, producing very different crystals. Carbon atoms, if they parade on one way, make the legendarily hard diamond crystal. But if they adopt a different formation, they make crystal of graphite, so soft it's used as a lubricant. What? No misses. This chapter has been unusual in that it didn't begin with a list of misses. This was only because it was so hard to find any misses on this subject. Unlike, say, the sun, or the rainbow, or earthquake, the fascinating world of the very small never come to the notice of primitive people. If you think about this for a minute, it's not really surprising. They had no way of even knowing it was there, and so of course they didn't invent any misses to explain it. It wasn't until the microscope was invented in the 16th century that people discovered that ponds and lakes, soil and dust, even our own bodies, thin with tiny living creatures, too small to see, yet complicated and in other way beautiful, or perhaps frightening, depending on how you think about them. Dust mites are distantly related to the spiders, but too small to see except as tiny specks. There are thousands of them in every home, crawling through every carpet and every bed, quite probably including yours. If primitive people had known about them, you can imagine that myths are legends they might be invented to explain them. But before the invention of the microscope, their existence was not even dreamed of, and so there are no myths about them. And small as it is, even a dust mite contains more than 100 trillion atoms. Dust mites are too small for us to see, but the cell of which they are made are smaller still. The bacteria that live inside them and us in vast numbers are smaller than that. And atoms are far, far smaller even than bacteria. And the whole world is made of incredibly tiny things, much too small is visible to the naked eye, and yet none of the myths were so-called holy books, and some people even now think were given to us by all-knowing God, mention them at all. In fact, when you look at those myths and stories, you can see that they don't contain any of the knowledge that science has patiently worked out. They don't tell us how big and how old the universe is. They don't tell us how to treat cancer. They don't explain gravity and the internal combustion engine. They don't tell us about germs or nuclear fusion or electricity and statistics. In fact, unsurprisingly, the stories in holy books don't contain any more information about the world than was known to the primitive people who first started telling them. If these holy books really were written, were dictated, were inspired by all-knowing God, don't you think it's odd that those gods said nothing about any of these important and useful things?